Okay, good evening. Right. The question that I'd like to sort of begin by addressing is the question of what Yaakov's main concern is. What is Yaakov's concern when he leaves? It's obvious that he has left, as we for the dual purposes of both escaping Esau as well as finding the potential to find a wife, and that's why his father sent him. What are his concerns? What is his main concern? So the Kliyokar here at the beginning of the parsha, it's actually on Vayikach me'avnei hamokim. We're all familiar with the issue with the stones. Rashi brings Vayikach me'avnei hamokim. He takes from the stones of the place. He places them around his head. Vayishkav mokim ahu. And we're all familiar with the medrash that says, Rashi brings that they began to argue with one another. Rashi says, this one says that Tzaddik should put his head on me. This one says on me. Hashem makes them into one stone. That's Vaikaches or Even, the stone Hashem Marasha. It's something we've learned from our earliest days. This medrash is one that, as always with a medrash, particularly one that we're so familiar with, we need to understand what the essence of the message is. What is the medrash trying to convey? That's the key point. It's not just to tell us the fact that there was this nace and the fact that the stones joined together. That's the case, but there's a message here for us. And the way the Kliyokar explains it, the Oznaim Torah also speaks about this. That he says that Yaakov, the stones, of course, represent the Shvatim that will be from him, the 12 Shvatim. The stones are fighting with one another. Says the Kliyokar, 12 stones corresponding to 12 tribes. They're all fighting till they became one stone. Remez leosid. This is a hint to the future. He brings the Rambam Mer Nevuchim. Hashem, if you like, concealed this place that would one day become the place of the Beis Hamikdash. And that's the whole story. Presumably, he's referring to the fact that he missed it and came back. The whole story of how finding that place. There will be no strife, no arguing amongst the Shvatim, because they would all want an association, a connection to that place, the place where Yaakov was, the place where the Beis Hamikdash would be built. The idea is that Yaakov's key concern here is one of unity amongst his children. The message of the stones coming together, the uniting of the stones, the differentiation between them, the 12 stones, through the night, and then in the morning they come together as one stone, is a message of reassurance to Yaakov Avinu that you will not be the same. You won't have that same experience as the previous two generations, where there's a Yitzchak and a Yishmael, and there's a Yaakov and Esav, but all of your children will come together. But that concern is one which is, as I said, expressed in that medrash right at the beginning, a reassurance in a way that we'll all come together as one, and by the fact that they have a unifying point that links them together, which is Vayifka B'Mokom, that's that place. The place itself is where they become one, the place of the Beis Hamikdash, but it's a perennial concern. It's a concern that begins with Yaakov Avinu and continues through the generations. The fact that Jews are very different. Every Jew is very different. People are very, we have our differences in terms of our differences of opinion. It begins then and it continues forever. And it's a concern that remains a concern and has always remained a concern. But what has always united us as a people, as is often the case when people are united around an ideal, that's the point. We are united around a common ideal. We come together. That's Vayishkav B'Mokom. He encounters the place. That place will become the unifying center of our people as a whole. Everyone will say that they want the key purpose, to be the center. He should place his head on me, but ultimately they understand that it's through coming together and joining together through the Beis Hamikdash that links them all together. Now, we have a representation of this and that concern that Yaakov has going forward with the Shvatim. So Yehuda, all the Shvatim, of course, are born in this week's parsha except for Binyamin. Yehuda and Don are two opposites in a sense. Yehuda is the leader. Yehuda is the one who is the king. He's the melech. He's the one at the front. And Don is the opposite. Don is at the back. He's behind. Yes, he's right at the. He's small in many different ways. Small in name, small in numbers. The name Don is a very short name. There are lots of aspects of Don that seem to imply something which is minimized, something which is reduced. And yet, what we find is that eventually Don's numbers do flourish. He begins with one, Chushim ben Don. There's only one. He has one son compared to many others who have many more, and yet his numbers increase tremendously. And particularly, the idea of Don's role in protecting the borders of Eretz Yisrael, that's one of the key roles. We have this concept of Midon va'ad Be'er Sheva, from Don in the north to Be'er Sheva, so that it's the protection of the land of Israel. And he becomes, as the phrase that Yaakov uses before he passes away, Don Yodin Amoy, Don will judge his people, Ka'achad Shivtei Yisrael, like the one of the tribes of Israel. Who is that? Like Yehuda. So we have there the represented in those two Shvatim in particular, two who look like opposite extremes. Yehuda is the leader and Don is right at the back. But ultimately, through the role that Don plays, through fulfilling the role of Don, he becomes on a par with Yehuda. So it's a beautiful representation of this idea and the notion that those 12 Shvatim will all be very different, but it's only through the fact that they can come together, they can complement one another, that the Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people as a whole, will be whole. We also find that Yaakov's commitment, if you like, and his dedication to his children is evidenced in his attitude towards Leah. And there are many, many different puzzling aspects of the whole parsha, obviously. One of them is Leah. Vayar Hashem ki snua Leah, that Leah was hated. What does that mean? How could Yaakov hate Leah? What does that mean? What do those words mean, right? You look at the Ramban. The Ramban, if you're following inside, it is Perek Chof Tes, Pasuk Lamed Aleph. The Ramban says, let's find it in a short one. Yeah. So this is going on. This is going on the fact that why does the Torah says that Leah gives birth? Vayar Hashem ki snua Leah. Hashem sees that Leah is hated. Vayifaches rachma, and therefore he opens her womb. V'Rachel akoro, Rachel is barren. And Leah gives birth to Reuven, and she says, "Now Atzor Yehovra Hashem ba'ani, Hashem has seen my affliction." And then you have Shimon as well. Ki snua anochi, Hashem has seen that I'm hated. She calls his name Shimon. Says the Ramban, Hine Leah rom sabachosa. You have to understand. He says that Leah deceived. Leah deceived her sister. She was part of the deception. Gambi Yaakov, also with Yaakov. Ki imnei mashnaga kavod ba'aviyah she'achas ba v'chnisa ilava al tamer boy. Even if you're going to say that she had to do this out of respect to her father, who essentially forced her to do it, so she couldn't rebel against her father, she should have told or sent hint somewhere that she was Leah. In some way, she should have given that. She should have been able to convey that message. Even if she was treated as a, she behaved in that way. In that way, she behaved in a way. I think he's referring to the fact that she sort of hid her identity the whole night. He didn't recognize her until the morning. And therefore Yaakov hated her for that reason. See, this is a different perspective. Do you understand? This is like when you think about it, the way the Ramban is explaining it, it makes sense in the sense that there was a natural reason for there to be an animosity between Yaakov and Leah, because at the end of the day, she had gone along with that deception, and that was very difficult for Yaakov. We'll come back to why that was so difficult in a moment. Says the Ramban, Hashem knows that the real reason why she did so was because to be able to marry the tzaddik, to be able to marry Yaakov, so Hashem had mercy upon her. This is what it says in the Medrash in Bereishis Rabbah. Kivan shera Yaakov masim sheromsa Leah ba'achosa. When Yaakov saw the deception that Leah had performed against her sister. She'd been part of that deception, even though it was, of course, led, instigated, and encouraged by her father. There is still the concept of free will, of Bechira. She could have resisted in some way. She could have given away the fact that she was in that position. Therefore, no son daito legarsha. So Yaakov thought, I'm going to divorce her. Why should I stay married to her? But once Hashem gave her children, Omar, he said, Le'imon shel elu ani megarish. How can I think of divorcing the mother of these children? Hashem had pity on her, had mercy on her, that he should not forsake her. So in other words, what Ramban here is doing is explaining multiple different things to us. Number one, he's explaining the background why Vayar Hashem kisnu Leah. What was the essence of why Leah was one of the puzzling things in the Parsha? Why was there that animosity? The answer is because for Yaakov Avinu, the deception itself was the antithesis of everything he stood for. He was the Ish HaEmes, he is the man of truth. So to effectively be married to someone who was involved in a deception right from the very beginning, right from the start, that's something which is immensely difficult for him to cope with, to bear, to manage, etc., etc. But at the same time, the Ramban tells us something else, and that is what brings him together to Leah, what ensures that he remains committed to that marriage is the fact that Hashem blesses her with children. And he says, Yaakov Avinu, is it possible for me to divorce the mother of these children? He remains committed because he knows that the commitment is essential for his children, even if he still keeps and still has that difficulty and that challenge there in terms of the relationship he has with Leah. So that's the direct, that's, if you like,
basically he was getting his own dessert.
Yeah.
So
in what sense?
Well, the rabbi said about justice, about truth. He tricked his father.
Okay. So what?
So basically, he was just getting back.
So essentially what you find here is.
The other question
right. So right, exactly. Yeah, of course, that's right. The Ramban is I think bringing together the idea of what the Torah means when it says that Hashem has Vayar Hashem saw Kisnu Leah and realizes that this is what will ensure that Leah remains in the marriage, if you like. But I think the point about the fact that the notion of deception, and again, it's the way the Mefarshim understand, I think, the whole story of Yaakov. And this is not just with Yaakov, it's with all of the Avos. You can follow this through. They are challenged in the very areas that they represent. So you find that the whole way through, you find that consistently. The whole way through Parshas Vayetzei, for example, it's a continuation in the sense that there's a challenge again and again and again to Yaakov on the fact that he's the personal man of truth. Think of the relationship with Love, on the way Love tricks him. There's deceit going through the whole way through the story in the sense that he has to remain the man of truth despite being in immensely difficult and complicated situations. That's essentially what you find, what you see in the Parsha. And we can bring a number of examples of that. So number one, again, another Kliyakar. If you look at Lamed Aleph, Mem Aleph, the Kliyakar brings a very beautiful pshat in a posuk, which reconciles a contradiction. It's right near the end of the parsha. So there is a contradiction here because there is this 20-year period that Yaakov says that he works for Lavan, right? So he says when he gives the speech to Lavan towards the end, a very powerful speech, and he says, you searched everything out, you investigated, you've seen what have you found? I haven't said nothing. There's nothing here. He doesn't know that Rachel has taken the trophim, of course, right? I was with you for 20 years. Nothing went wrong. There was nothing wrong with the sheep, nothing miscarried, nothing. I looked after everything. Carries on, and it was in. He paints the picture. The heat and the cold at night. Then he says, this is to me 20 years in your house. So the Kliyakar asks, what is the change? So the first time he says, this 20 years, Anochi imoch, I am with you. Second time it says, Zeli esrim shana b'veisecha. So this is to me 20 years in your house. So there's two changes. Number one is the word li, and number one is the beisecha in your house. So what's the change? So the Kli Yakar says that Yaakov wasn't in the house of Lavan for 20 years. He was actually only there for 1 month. In terms of actually living in Lavan's house, it says that Vayeshev imoi chodesh yomim. He stayed there for a month. That's how long he was there. The implication is it was only 1 month. He was actually in Lavan's house. The rest of the time, he was in a different place. He was living in Lavan's territory, but he was having his own tents in the fields with the sheep, whatever. He wasn't actually inside Lavan's house the rest of the time. And that's what he means when he says I was outside in the heat and the cold and everything else. It wasn't actually inside the house. So the Kli Yakar says about halfway through this piece, nevertheless, even that month of days that he dwells in the house of the Rasha and the Ramai, to him, they were a long period of time. They weren't like a short period of time. They were difficult for him, because it felt like a long time. And he said, woe to me, I've been an awfully long time living with this individual. And if it's only a short period of time, li, it is to me. To me, it's like I've been 20 years in his house. That's how the Kli Yakar explains it. You understand? So he was with Lavan, not in his house for 20 years, and is associated with Lavan, yeah. But Zeli Esrim Shana, to me, that 1 month in your house was like 20 years. It was as if I spent 20 years in your house. Why? Because it was so difficult to me to cope with, to be with you for all that time. The pain and the difficulty and the trouble in being with you for 20 years, for the 1 month, was as if I was with you for the whole 20 years inside your house. Again, it's the same idea. Yaakov is someone who stands for truth, for emes, and he's forced into a position where he has to stay with someone who is the antithesis of this, is the antithesis of it in terms of deceit, in terms of ramos, which is what Lavan symbolizes. Another really, I think, beautiful representation of Yaakov's adherence to truth is, and I realize we're jumping a little bit backwards and forwards in the Parsha. If you look at Rashi, again, back to the beginning, Chof Test Zion, I deliberately wanted to do it in this order because I think that this is a sort of almost like a deeper level in a way. We have this very, very surprising Rashi. Yaakov Avinu arrives at the well, Vayomer, and he says, "Hein oid hayom gadol." The day is still a lot of the daytime left. Lo yisel sepa mikneh. It's not time to bring in the sheep. Hashkot zener l'churu. What are you doing? Right? What are you doing? Why is it you're doing? And they answer and they say, we can't until everyone gathers together and they roll off the stone, and we'll be able to give the drink. Now Rashi says, what was Yaakov saying to them? Lefisha rose some rove tim posuk Zion. He saw them crouching by the well. They want to go home. Below your road, they're not going to pasture graze anymore. There's still a lot of time left in the day. If you're hired laborers, you haven't finished the day. There's a lot of time left. You shouldn't be stopping halfway through the day. If the animals are yours, they belong to you. Even so, even if you own your own animals, still, it's not the time to bring the sheep in. Now, there's a problem with both halves of this conversation. What does Yaakov do? He says two things to them. Number one, he says, if you're hired to do a job, then you should be finishing the day. You should not be going, finishing halfway through. You should make sure you complete the work you've been employed to do. If you're not employees and you are self-employed and they are your animals, these sheep, it's still not time. You should carry on. Now, both are problematic. Number one, Yaakov is a stranger. He arrives at this place. What's the first thing he does? He starts criticizing them on their shepherding practices. It's a very, very strange thing to do. You would think that he would want to sort of slowly make friends and get involved. And first thing he does is he launches into a critique of the way they're leading their lives. That's a problem with everything he says. But the bigger issue, if you like, was why is it that Yaakov says to them, even if the sheep are your own, it's not the time to come in. You should be carrying on. So I can understand that the first claim we can explain as him saying, this jars with everything I stand for. He was an Ish HaEmes, man of truth. He couldn't bear to see a scenario where there were paid staff who were simply sort of not working as they should do for their employers. It bothered him, right? That it was his midah was MS, and therefore he spoke up. But what's the second bit got to do with MS? It's not. It doesn't make a difference if you own your own animals, and you can decide when you want to feed your animals. You can decide whether you want to work the whole day or not. So why? What was his problem there? So the Sifsei Chaim brings in the name of Abba Grospa, who's Mashkech and Ponovich Yeshiva. He says like this. He says, and this is a really important insight into what MS is. He says that what MS really is, and we say Titain MS liYaakov, give truth to Yaakov. MS means, he says, Lishmor al hametzius hashleimo, to do things properly, to do things in a complete way. Yaakov is called Tomim, right? Complete, wholesome. If a person looks at the world in a wholesome way, he calls it L'shleimus hametzius, to ensure that everything is done properly, even if the person themselves owns that, that setting, like here where they own the sheep themselves. Ultimate truth is recognizing that if you don't look after the way things are, you're running things, even if they're under your own jurisdiction, that's also missing in some way what truth is, what MS really is. The MS of Yaakov is an MS of shleimus, of completion. It's not deceit. There's nothing wrong. They're their own animals. They can make the decision whether or not they want to, how long they want to, how they want to carry out their work, whether they want to finish halfway through the day, etc., etc. But Yaakov's avodah is shleimus, is completion, and he couldn't see and couldn't bear the fact that there would be people who would not strive for precision, for completeness, for doing things properly in the fullness of time and in the right way. And of course, where do you find the other example of this? Next week's Parsha. Yaakov goes back for the Pachim Katanim. He goes back for the tiny jugs. And again, why? Who cares? Nothing wrong. It's not MS, they belong to him. He doesn't need to go back and rescue the little jugs. But the point is, they may be worth very little, but he needs to protect the notion of doing things properly in the fullness, to the best ability possible. The idea was that if a person looks for truth, it also means making sure that they're not cutting corners. You're doing everything properly as it should be carried out. That's what bothers Yaakov here. So there are two examples of this. When we look at the end of the parsha again, Lamed Aleph Mem Gimel, we have the words Vayishova Yaakov b'fachad oviv Yitzchak. Lamed Aleph Mem Gimel. It says, Mem Gimel is where he says, he says that the God of my father, of Avram Avinu, and of Pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Yitzchak. Rashi explains why it is the Pachad Yitzchak, not the God of Yitzchak, in the sense that Yitzchak, Hashem doesn't designate his name to tzaddikim whilst they're still alive. So the idea is, he says to Lavan, if not for that protection, you would have sent me away with nothing. But then at the end, he says, right towards the end, they make this pact, this treaty between them, and it says that Lavan uses the name Nun Gimel, Elokei Avram, Elohei Nochar Yishbatu Veinenu, Elohei Avihem. He kind of makes this joint partnership between the God of Avram, the God of Nochar, who of course that was the idolatrous. And then it says, Vayishova Yaakov b'fachad oviv Yitzchak. But Yaakov swears by the fear, the pachad oviv Yitzchak. What does that mean? It's a tiny little kliyokar earlier on, Posuk Mem Beis, right in the middle of quite a long piece. It's the third paragraph, and he brings a very, very, very beautiful pshat. Umasha Omar. Let's say if you're following inside, it's not the third paragraph. 1 second, where is it? It's the second paragraph. Sorry, it's the kliyokar on Lulei Elokei Ovi. And if you skip to the second paragraph, Umasha Omar, says the kliyokar. That which it says, Vayishova b'fachad oviv Yitzchak oviv. What does it mean? He swore by the fear of his father Yitzchak. Kosav Mari shenishba ba'akedas Yitzchak. He swore by the akedah itself. Kamo shenishba b'mitzvah. So one pshat is, it means he's made a shavua by the akedah itself, the power of the akedah. Olafidav areinu nishba b'mora oviv. He says, you know what it means? Pachad Yitzchak. It means the fear, the mora of kibbud avoim. That's what he made a shvur with. Ki zeh hoyes mitzvah chaviva olav. This mitzvah was very especially cherished to Yaakov. He made an oath in the mitzvah of the fear of his father. Specifically this mitzvah, because where was he going to do now? He was about to hurry back home. To fulfill this mitzvah. He was reminded of this mitzvah, and he made an oath through the mitzvah. But Vayishava Yaakov b'fachad of Yitzchak, through the fear of Yitzchak his father, he made an oath almost by his commitment to the mitzvah of kibbud avoim, mora of fearing one's father. And the reason why I think this is it's a very moving, very brief kliyakar, is because it completes that arc from the end of the Parshas Toras, right? Yaakov Avinu ends Parshas Toras with listening to his father. That's what he does. He listens to his parents. I think I mentioned this at some point over Shabbos last week. The idea we forget that so much of what transpires is just direct carrying out of his parents' instruction. His father says to him, "This is what I want you to do," and this is what he does. Come 20 years later, what is the comfort that Yaakov takes? By Yeshava b'fachad of Yitzchak, I fulfilled my father's wishes. I am now going to fulfill the mitzvah of kibbud avoim by turning around and going back home. There are no limits to the mitzvah of kibbud avoim. It's a message which begins at the end of Parshas Tolders and goes right to the end of Parshas Vayetzei, encompassing everything that transpires. What enwraps, if you like, the whole parsha is kibbud avoim. Yeah, Yaakov is doing what he sets out to do in that commitment to his father. One final idea, and that is the Be'er Yosef. The Be'er Yosef says on the pasuk of Vayihiva Boker v'hinei Leah. What happens is that we understand, says, and what we know the story that transpires. It's Leah, and he says to Lavan, "Why did you trick me? This is Perach Tes Pasuk. I worked for you for so long for Rochel," and Lavan says, "That's okay. Finish this week. You work for another 7 years, then you'll marry Rochel, and you work for another 7 years." Says the Be'er Yosef, the righteousness of Yaakov. He accepts Lavan's response, even though he knows his deception, even though he has been deceived, he is still able to stick to his truth, the truth that he represents, the emes that he represents. And when we see, he says, if you look further into this, you see that we see the idea of Yaakov being able to accept the principle of kol da'ovid rachmana l'tav ovid. Whatever Hashem does is for the best. He is able to believe and to demonstrate the fact that he understands that everything is min hashamayim, even if it comes through the actions of this incredibly wicked individual. Nevertheless, he demonstrates the fact that the deceit itself is something which he is able to keep to, if you like, to cope with because of the level of truth that he represents. He sticks to that come what may. Each individual person, and the whole way through Yaakov's life, he is balancing, if you like, the pain of the deception. He's balancing that either the need to have to go through the experiences that he has to go through, particularly with Lavan, but at the same time, it is the strength of his emunah which carries him through the whole way. And it is that strength of that emunah itself, which is, as the Medrash tells us, was ultimately the source of the Geula itself. Hari b'mesha amda Rachel ben Esayin, he says, b'godel tzidkosa v'kishron ma'aseh, Rachel was the one who was able to cope with that trial, that test. Zochi Yisrael at Seis min Hagolos. She was the one who ensured that her sister did not become embarrassed. And as a result of that, we know that Klal Yisrael will in the future be redeemed. That's Rachel mevako al baneha. Hashem says, "Mini kolech mibechi, yish tikva lachrisech." There's a hope for you at the end. V'shavu vonim ligvulam. The return will come. The return coming back comes through being able to Stick to a sense of what the right thing to do is, even if everyone else around you is embroiled in deceit. The power of the story of Vayetzei is the very fact. It is the very fact that the deceit accompanies Yaakov the whole way. The deceit accompanies Yaakov, yet he sticks to the path. And he says, it's true. It's going to be very difficult. I'm going to have to work another 7 years, but it doesn't matter because I'm the Ish HaEmes. And that is demonstrated more than any other way, I think, than that is demonstrated so powerfully by that idea of coming back to the notion of Kibbud Avoim, because he sticks to that path. I made a commitment to my parents, he says, and I will fulfill that commitment. He makes that oath with his father, through his father. Okay.
Shkoyach. Shkoyach, thank you so much. Shkoyach.
Shabbos. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you do, I look at